Welcome to Nazir Fears, where fear finds you. Do you dare to enter a world of unspeakable horror and chilling mysteries? If you love creepy true stories, urban legends, haunted places, and terrifying experiences, you're in the right place. What we offer: spine-chilling horror stories, dark and mysterious urban legends, real-life encounters with the supernatural, psychological horror and unexplained mysteries, new nightmares. Every daily upload a new video only for you. Subscribe if you dare. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You never know what's lurking in the dark. The Haunted Playground. It all began when I was 8 years old. I lived in a small, sleepy town where everyone knew each other. The kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and kids played outside without worry. There was an old playground near the edge of town. The swings creaked loudly in the wind, and the metal slides always seemed a little too hot during the summer. Most kids in the neighborhood stayed away from it, saying it was haunted. Of course, as a curious child, I dismissed those rumors as nothing more than the tall tales of older kids trying to scare us. One summer afternoon, I was hanging out with my friends, Sarah and Tom. We had been playing tag, running around in the tall grass that bordered the playground. The swings caught our attention first. They were swaying back and forth, but no one was on them. The wind was light, so it didn't seem likely that the swings could be moving by themselves. I remember Sarah making a joke, something about the ghosts of the old playground coming out to play. We all laughed, but something about that moment felt different. The air around us had turned unnaturally cold. As we walked closer to the swings, I noticed something strange. The chains of the swing were twisted, like someone had been yanking at them, trying to break free. Tom dared me to sit on one, so I did, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. As soon as I sat down, I felt a chill run through my body. It wasn't just the air that had gotten colder. It was as if something unseen was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I started to swing slowly, at first just pushing with my legs. But then, it felt like the swing was pushing itself. The motion became faster, and I couldn't stop. My legs weren't even touching the ground anymore. I felt the rush of wind in my face, my stomach flipping. I yelled for Tom and Sarah to stop me, but they were frozen, standing still, their faces pale as they stared at something behind me. I turned around, heart racing, expecting to see something, or someone standing there. But all I saw was the rusted old slide, standing tall and empty, like a forgotten monument. That's when I heard the whispers. At first, they were so faint, I thought I was imagining them. But as the swing sped up, the whispers grew louder. They sounded like voices, muffled and distant, like they were coming from underground. The words were unclear, but they felt wrong. I couldn't make out any specific words, just the undeniable feeling that I wasn't alone. A cold hand seemed to grip my heart as I swung higher and higher, the eerie whispers surrounding me from all sides. And then, just as suddenly as the movement had started, it stopped. The swing jerked to a halt, and I was thrown forward, almost falling off. I stumbled, catching myself just in time. I looked around to see Tom and Sarah still standing there, their eyes wide with fear. Neither of them spoke a word. "Did you hear that?" Sarah finally asked, her voice trembling. "I heard something," I replied, my own voice cracking. That's when we all noticed it. A figure standing at the top of the slide. It was a child, no older than 10, wearing an old-fashioned dress. Her hair was long and dark, and it seemed to move in the wind, even though there was no wind to speak of. Her face was pale, almost white, and her eyes were black, like empty pits. I couldn't look away. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. Without warning, the figure vanished. One moment she was standing there, the next moment she was gone, as though she had never been there at all. We ran. All three of us bolted from the playground without saying another word. We didn't stop until we were back at my house, slamming the door behind us. I remember sitting on the couch, wide-eyed, trying to explain what had just happened. But my parents just laughed, thinking we were making up stories. After all, it was just a playground, right? But it wasn't the first time I'd hear about strange occurrences at that playground. Over the years, I learned about the child who had died there many years before. An accident, they said, but no one had ever found out exactly how it happened. Some said she was playing alone when she fell off the swing and hit her head. Others said she had been pushed by another child. Whatever the truth was, the result was the same. She never left the playground. I never went back to that place. Even as an adult, I can't shake the memory of those black eyes and the whispers in the wind. The swing still creaks in my nightmares. Conclusion. That summer day left an indelible mark on my childhood. For years, I couldn't even walk past the playground without feeling a wave of anxiety. The whispers, the swing moving by itself, and the dark figure are memories that still haunt me today. Sometimes I wonder if it was just a child's imagination, but deep down, I know what I saw that day was real. I've never told anyone about it until now, but I still hear the whispers in my dreams. The playground, long abandoned, still holds a dark secret, a secret that I'll never fully understand. The mysterious doll. When I was 6 years old, I had a doll that I was particularly fond of. It wasn't just any doll. It was old and had belonged to my mother when she was a child. The doll's name was Annabelle, and it was made of porcelain with glass eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. Her clothes were delicate, frilly, and stained with age, but I loved her all the same. My mother told me stories about the doll, how she was always a part of our family, handed down from one generation to the next. I didn't think much about the stories until one night when I was playing alone in my room. I had placed Annabelle on my bed, sitting upright, and I was pretending to have a tea party. My mother was downstairs, and the house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. I had just set the little porcelain teapot down next to Annabelle when I heard a sound, like a soft thud, coming from the corner of the room. I turned around, expecting to see something fall, but nothing was out of place. The room seemed colder all of a sudden, and I shivered. I looked at Annabelle again, and something about her seemed different. She was no longer sitting upright. She had slumped to one side, her face twisted into what seemed like a permanent frown. At first, I thought maybe I had knocked her over by accident, so I picked her up and set her back into her original position. But as soon as I turned my back to continue my play, the doll slumped over again. This time I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, and the hairs on my arms stood up. I turned around, and to my horror, Annabelle was now lying face down on the bed, her arms outstretched. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I had not set her down properly the first time. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore it, but as I lay in bed that night, trying to sleep, I could have sworn I heard faint whispers coming from across the room. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but the whispers grew louder. They sounded like a woman's voice, softly calling my name. I tried to ignore it, pulling the covers over my head, but the whispers kept coming. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, but it sounded like it was right next to me. My heart raced, and I bolted upright, looking around the room, but everything was still. Then my gaze fell on Annabelle. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, facing me. That's when the room's temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath in the air. The doll's eyes glinted in the dim light, and I swore I saw them move, following me as I backed away from the bed. Panic set in, and I screamed for my mother, but when she came running up, there was nothing to show for what I had just witnessed. Annabelle was just sitting there, harmlessly, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to look at the doll. I shoved it into the back of my closet, burying it under blankets and stuffed animals, hoping it would stay out of sight and out of mind. But the eerie feeling lingered. Weeks passed, and everything seemed normal again. But then my mother asked me one day if I had been playing with Annabelle. I told her I hadn't, still shaken by the events that had happened. She told me that the doll had been missing for days. It had vanished from the spot I had left it in, only to turn up on my mother's dresser one morning, neatly positioned as though it had been placed there by someone. As a child, I couldn't fathom how it had moved. I was terrified, but my mother reassured me that I was just imagining things, that the doll had probably been moved while cleaning. Yet, deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the thought that Annabelle was somehow alive. Years went by, and I eventually forgot about the doll. My mother put it away in a box and stored it in the attic, never to be spoken of again. But every now and then, when I was alone in the house, I would get that feeling, as though someone was watching me. I would hear faint whispers at night, but when I would check the dark corners of my room, I would find nothing. One day, while cleaning out the attic, I came across the old box containing Annabelle. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the doll again. I hesitated but decided to take her downstairs. As I dusted her off and set her on a shelf, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease wash over me. Her glass eyes stared at me, but they didn't seem lifeless anymore. They seemed full of intent. That night I woke up to a cold gust of wind blowing through my room. I sat up in bed, feeling the same chill from my childhood experiences with the doll. As I turned my head, I saw her, sitting on the edge of my bed once more, as though she had been waiting for me to wake up. The whispers began again, but this time they were louder, more distinct. They weren't just faint sounds from the corners of the room. The voice was right next to me, a soft, soothing voice that seemed to say, "Come play with me." I tried to move, to scream, but I couldn't. My body was frozen in place, as though the doll's gaze had paralyzed me. The voice continued, "Come play with me, and you'll never be alone again." With a great effort, I managed to move, running out of the room, leaving Annabelle behind. From that night on, I couldn't escape the sensation that something, someone, was always with me. A presence that followed me, watching, waiting. I tried to ignore it, but I could never shake the feeling. The next morning, Annabelle was gone again. I never saw the doll again, but every now and then, I hear whispers in the dark, and I can't help but wonder if she's out there somewhere, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. Conclusion. To this day, I don't know what happened with Annabelle. Was it my imagination, or was the doll truly cursed a vessel for something dark and malevolent. I still feel its presence, though, and sometimes, when the room goes cold and the whispers start, I wonder if Annabelle is still waiting for me, ready to play. The Unseen Friend. It was the summer of 1997, and I was just 10 years old. My family had moved into an old house at the edge of a small, quiet town. The house was beautiful, but it had a history that no one talked about. The house had been vacant for years before we moved in, and even the neighbors were a little strange about it. But my parents insisted that the house was perfect for our family, and so we moved in, eager to start a new chapter of our lives. At first, everything seemed fine. My brother Jason and I explored the house, finding hidden nooks and crannies, old bookshelves and dusty attics. The house had an old, creaky charm, the kind you would expect from a century-old home. But soon after we moved in, strange things started to happen. I was the youngest in the family, and I often found myself wandering around the house alone. One day, I was in the basement, exploring the piles of old furniture and boxes that had been left behind. I remember hearing something, footsteps, soft and slow, coming from the far corner of the basement. I turned around, but no one was there. I called out to my brother, but he was upstairs, so it couldn't have been him. I shrugged it off as my imagination and continued exploring. But the strange feeling lingered. The basement was always cold, and no matter how many times we turned up the thermostat, it never seemed to warm up. It felt as if the house was trying to keep something hidden down there. The next day, while my parents were busy unpacking, I wandered into the basement again. This time, I could feel the presence, something watching me, something lurking just out of sight. I tried to ignore it and keep busy, but as I walked past an old wardrobe in the corner of the room, I heard a voice. It was faint at first, a whisper almost. "Come closer." I froze. It was a soft voice, almost childlike, and it came from the wardrobe. I backed away, my heart racing. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the wind or my imagination running wild. But the voice came again, this time clearer, more insistent. "Come closer. I'm lonely." I don't know why I did it, but I approached the wardrobe. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle, but before I could open it, the voice stopped. I pulled open the wardrobe door, expecting to find nothing but old coats and a few forgotten trinkets. But there, sitting on the floor in the far corner, was a small, wooden figure. It was a carved doll, one that I had never seen before, and certainly not something that belonged to our family. It was a simple doll, about the size of my hand, carved from dark wood. The features were sharp, almost too sharp, and its eyes were hollow like they were staring straight through me. I shuddered as I picked it up, a wave of cold running through me. Something about the doll felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "Keep me," the voice whispered again, this time more urgent. I don't know why, but I took the doll upstairs and placed it on my nightstand. I thought it would be harmless, just a strange object I found in the house. But that night, things changed. I was in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard it again, the whispering. It was faint, coming from the corner of my room. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind or the house settling. But the voice grew louder, more distinct. I'm here. Come play with me." I turned toward the corner, and there, standing in the shadows, was the doll. It was no longer on my nightstand. It had moved. My heart raced as I reached for the light, turning it on. But when I looked again, the doll was back on the table, motionless as if nothing had happened. I ran to my parents' room, shaking, and told them about the voice and the doll. They reassured me that it was just a bad dream. But I knew what I had heard, and that wasn't the only thing. The next few nights were worse. I began to feel as if someone, was always in my room with me. I'd hear soft footsteps on the floor, feel cold spots by my bed, and sometimes I'd wake up to find the doll missing again. This went on for weeks. My parents tried to ease my fears, but I could sense they were growing uneasy too. The atmosphere in the house had changed. It was no longer just an old house. It felt like a home, haunted by something that wanted to make itself known. One night, things escalated. I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared into the darkness, not daring to move. The whispers were louder now, closer. "Come play with me," the voice said again. But this time, I heard it coming from the foot of my bed. Terrified, I turned to look and saw the doll standing there, its hollow eyes staring directly at me. But something else stood next to it. An outline of a small, shadowy figure, no taller than I was. It had no face, just a vague silhouette, but I could feel it staring at me, watching me, waiting for me to move. "Come play," it whispered again, and this time it wasn't just the doll. The room grew darker, colder. The figure reached toward me, its hand extended, but before I could react, I heard the voice of my mother calling me from downstairs. The figure and the doll vanished as if they had never been there at all. The next morning, I told my parents everything. They seemed worried, but when they checked my room, the doll was gone. They searched the house, but there was no sign of it. It was as if it had vanished, leaving no trace. My mother even checked the basement, but the wardrobe was empty. The doll had disappeared completely, and so did the whispers. But that wasn't the end. A few years later, I overheard my parents talking late at night. My mother was telling my father about how the previous owners of the house had lost their child. A little girl, just my age, who had died under mysterious circumstances. There had been rumors of a curse attached to the house, a spirit who wouldn't leave, a spirit who wanted to play. The doll, they said, had belonged to her. I never spoke of the doll again, but the feeling lingered, the whispers in the dark, the presence in my room. Every time I moved, I was reminded of that ghostly figure, and I often wondered if the doll had somehow summoned it. To this day, I avoid old houses, and I never forget the feeling of being watched. I still sometimes hear faint whispers when the night is too quiet. I can never shake the feeling that the doll is still out there, waiting, calling me to come back and play. Conclusion. The doll and its whispers haunted me long after I left that house. The memory of its hollow eyes and the cold figure in my room still linger. Whether it was a manifestation of my fears or something darker, I will never know. But the one thing I do know is that some things from childhood never truly leave us. And sometimes the things we can't explain stay with us forever. The Whispering Walls. I was 9 years old when I first noticed something was wrong with the house we had just moved into. My parents were excited about the big old house in the countryside, but for me, it felt more like a prison. The house was huge, too big for just the three of us, and it had an unsettling vibe that made my skin crawl. We moved in during the fall, right before Halloween. It was a typical spooky season with falling leaves and chilly nights, but the house gave off a sense of something unnatural. From the first day we arrived, I felt as if I wasn't alone. I remember standing in the entryway with my mom, looking up at the grand staircase that seemed to stretch forever toward the dark ceiling, and thinking, I don't want to be here. At first, my parents thought I was just being difficult. The house was charming, they said, and the previous owners had taken good care of it. But as the weeks passed, I began hearing things. It started with whispers, so soft that I thought it was the wind, or maybe the old house settling. But then the whispers turned into more. They began to form words, clear enough that I could hear them, but not clear enough to understand. It wasn't just in one part of the house. It was everywhere. Walking down the hallway, I would hear voices from the walls, soft and unintelligible. Sometimes I'd hear a laugh or a low murmur coming from the rooms around me, but when I checked, no one was there. I remember the first time it happened clearly. I was in my room unpacking some of my things when I heard a whisper. It wasn't just a random sound. It was my name. Katie. I froze. The voice was unmistakably human, soft and whispering. I was alone in the room, and the voice sounded so close, as though someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. I remember feeling a chill run through my body as the voice came again. Katie, come closer. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I bolted out of the room, running straight to my mom, who was busy in the kitchen. I told her what happened, but she brushed it off as my imagination. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew what I had heard was real. Over the next few days, the whispers continued. They would start as soft murmurs and slowly escalate. Sometimes I would hear footsteps following me around the house. I'd be sitting on the couch, and I could hear someone walking just behind me. But when I turned around, there was no one there. It felt like the house itself was alive, watching me, waiting for me to discover whatever secret it was hiding. Then, one night, things escalated. It was a stormy evening, and the wind howled outside. The power had gone out, so the house was plunged into darkness. I was in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard it again. The whispering. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just one voice. It was several, all speaking at once, murmuring in unison. Come closer. Come see us. The words were louder now, more urgent, and they were coming from all around me, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. I could feel my bed shaking as if someone, or something, was moving beneath it. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay frozen, unable to move or scream. I wanted to call out to my parents, but the whispers grew louder, drowning out everything else. Then, suddenly, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I screamed, bolting upright in my bed, but there was no one there. I scrambled out of bed, flipping on the light switch. The room was empty. My heart was racing and I could barely breathe. I ran to my parents' room and told them everything that had happened, but they simply told me it was a bad dream. I couldn't convince them that it was real. The next day, things seemed normal again. My parents, although concerned about my nightmares, thought it was just me adjusting to the new house. But for me, the whispers never stopped. It was as though they had become part of the house, part of the air I breathed. It wasn't long before I started noticing strange things in the house. Objects out of place, doors opening and closing on their own, things I couldn't explain. One evening, I was in the kitchen with my mom, and I heard a soft laugh coming from behind me. When I turned around, there was nothing there, just the empty hallway leading to the rest of the house. One night, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I crept through the dark hallways of the house, determined to find the source of the whispers. The house felt oppressive as I made my way through the rooms, the shadows stretching longer than they should. The closer I got to the walls, the louder the voices became. They were unmistakable now, sobbing, pleading voices calling out for help. I followed the voices down to the basement. The door to the basement was old and creaky, the wood groaning as I slowly opened it. The air was thick with dust and the smell of dampness. The flashlight flickered as I stepped down the stairs, the beam of light barely cutting through the darkness. The basement was cold, and the whispers were louder now, echoing off the walls. I reached the far corner and froze. There, on the floor, was a small, dusty wooden chest. It looked old, much older than anything in the house, and it was covered in strange symbols that seemed to move in the light. I knelt down, trembling, and reached for the lid. As soon as my fingers touched it, the voices grew frantic, their cries turning into desperate screams. I opened the chest, and inside, I found nothing but dirt and old, rotting paper. But as I peered closer, I saw something written on the inside of the lid, scrawled hastily in what appeared to be blood. Your neck. A cold chill ran through my body as the whispers stopped. The silence in the basement was deafening, and I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. I looked up, and in the corner of the room, a dark figure stood watching me. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me. I quickly slammed the chest shut and bolted upstairs, my heart racing in my chest. I never spoke of what I saw in the basement, but I knew one thing for certain. The house was haunted, and whatever was trapped inside it wasn't going to leave any time soon. From that night on, the whispers never stopped. They followed me everywhere, growing louder and more insistent. I knew that something dark was tied to the house, something that would never let go of me, no matter where I went. Eventually, my family moved out of the house. My parents said it was for the best, that the neighborhood was becoming too dangerous. But I knew the truth. We left because something was following us, something that would never let us forget the house with the whispering walls. To this day, I can still hear the whispers in my dreams. They call my name, telling me I'm not safe, that the house will always be with me, waiting. Conclusion. I still don't know what was inside that chest, or what those voices wanted, but I do know that whatever it wasn't human. There's something evil that lives in that house, something that still watches me, even from afar. The Thing Under the Bed. It was the summer of 2001 when my parents decided to take us on a road trip across the country. We were staying in a small-town motel halfway between states. The motel was old and outdated, with creaky floors and yellowing wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. Despite its worn appearance, the town was quiet, and the room was decent enough for a one-night stopover. I was 11 years old at the time, sharing the room with my little sister, Emily. We were given a room with 2 beds, one for me and one for her. It wasn't the best, but it was enough for one night. The atmosphere in the room felt a little off, though, like something wasn't quite right. I tried to shake off the feeling, but as soon as I lay down on my bed, it was hard to ignore the strange tension in the air. The room was small, and the bed was positioned right next to the wall. The dim light from the lamp on the nightstand created long shadows, making the room feel even smaller than it actually was. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. It was one of those irrational fears you have as a kid, but this one felt different. This was real. It wasn't my imagination. The room felt heavy, as though something was lurking in the corners, waiting to pounce. Around midnight, I heard Emily softly calling my name from her bed. I looked over at her, and she was sitting up, looking at the floor with wide eyes. "What's wrong?" I whispered, trying not to wake our parents. "There's something under the bed," she said in a trembling voice. I was startled, but I told her it was probably just her imagination. "There's nothing under the bed," I reassured her. "It's just shadows." I got up and walked over to her bed, but as I knelt beside her, I felt the weight of her fear. But I heard it. Her voice was small and scared. I heard it breathing. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to laugh it off, but her fear was contagious. The room felt colder now, the kind of cold you get when you're in a place that doesn't feel safe. I glanced at the bed. It was too dark to see anything, but the shadows from the lamp made it look like the floor was shifting. It was a weird sensation, like something was moving under the bed, shifting in the dark. My breath caught in my throat. "I'll check," I said, though I didn't want to. I slowly knelt down, feeling the carpet under my knees, and leaned my head over the side of the bed. The space underneath was dark and silent. Nothing. I exhaled, half relieved, but before I could move away, I heard it. A faint scratching sound, like something long and sharp dragging along the floor beneath the bed. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily must have heard it too, because she gasped, her little fingers gripping my arm tightly. I quickly stood up, feeling a chill run down my spine. "It's just the building settling," I said, though even I didn't believe it. But then came the whisper, faint at first, but growing louder, and it sounded like someone was breathing, but not in a normal way. It was heavy, raspy, like something was waiting. I felt sick to my stomach. "I don't want to sleep here," Emily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I agreed. We needed to leave the room, but I didn't want to wake our parents. So I tried to stay calm and told Emily we would go outside for a bit, just to get some fresh air. We walked quietly to the door, trying not to make any noise, but just as I reached for the door handle, the whisper came again, louder this time. "Come closer." It was the first time I heard the words, a slow, soft whisper, like a voice from the depths of the floor, urging me to step closer to the bed. Before I could react, Emily screamed. I turned around and saw her pointing at the bed. My heart dropped into my stomach. Under the bed I could see two eyes staring up at us, large, dark, and hollow. They weren't human. They were too big, too round, and they glowed faintly in the dim light. I felt a wave of pure terror wash over me as I realized that whatever was under the bed wasn't just a figment of Emily's imagination. I slammed the door open, bolting out of the room and down the hallway. Emily followed me, her small feet barely keeping up with my panicked strides. We found our parents sitting in the lobby, talking with the motel owner. When I ran up to them, I couldn't speak at first. I just grabbed their arms, shaking. "What happened?" my dad asked, looking at me like I was crazy. "What's wrong?" "There's something in our room," I gasped. "Something under the bed. It has eyes." My parents exchanged confused glances. "Sweetheart, you're just scared. It's late, and it's probably just shadows. There's nothing in your room," I insisted. But my mom brushed it off, saying it was just a bad dream. Still, they agreed to move us to a different room. When we went back upstairs to grab our things, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I glanced down the hall, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move in the shadows. When we finally checked out the next morning, the owner gave us a strange look as we were leaving. He seemed almost nervous, like he knew something we didn't. "Have a good day," he said with a forced smile. "Glad you enjoyed your stay." It was the way he said it that made me uneasy. It felt like he was hiding something. I wanted to ask about the room, about the strange things that happened, but I didn't dare. I knew he wasn't going to answer. We never stayed in that motel again. Years later, I did some research and found out that the building had once been a hospital. It had been abandoned for years before being turned into a motel. But the most disturbing part was a report from decades earlier about a child who had been found under one of the beds, abandoned and left to die in the dark. The child had apparently been hiding there for weeks before anyone noticed. The authorities had never been able to determine how the child had ended up there, but the story seemed to fit. It was almost as if that presence, those eyes, had been waiting for someone else to come back, someone to continue what had been left undone. I never went back to that motel, but to this day, I can't shake the feeling that the thing under the bed is still out there, waiting for someone to see it again. Conclusion. The thing under the bed may not have been a ghost, but something far worse, a remnant of the past, lingering in the shadows, just waiting for someone to come too close. The thing that lived under that bed wasn't done yet, and I fear it still waits. The Girl in the Mirror. I was just 8 years old when my family moved into an old Victorian house in the middle of nowhere. My parents thought it would be a great place to raise a family. A quiet, peaceful town with nothing but fields and old houses. The house we bought was large, with creaky floorboards, high ceilings, and more rooms than we could fill. It had a charm to it, but something about the house felt off, even to me as a child. My parents didn't notice, though. They were just happy to finally get away from the noise of the city. It was in the upstairs hallway that I first noticed her. The house had a large, old-fashioned mirror hanging at the end of the hall. It was one of those mirrors with an ornate frame, dusty and cracked in places. I don't know why, but it always caught my attention whenever I passed by. I'd stop for a moment, stare into the reflection, and then move on. But one evening, as I was heading to my room after dinner, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. At first, I didn't think much of it. I just thought my mind was playing tricks on me in the dim hallway light. But when I looked closer, I saw her. She was standing in the reflection, right behind me. The girl was a little older than I was, probably about 10 or 11, with long, tangled hair that hung in front of her face. She was staring at me with an intense, empty gaze. Her clothes were strange, out of place. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, one I had never seen before. Her skin was pale, and the shadows in the hallway made her face look almost hollow. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one, just the empty hallway stretching out before me. My heart raced, and I felt a chill run through my body. I glanced back at the mirror, and the girl was still there, standing motionless. I ran to my room shaking and told my parents about what I saw. They laughed it off, of course, telling me that it was just my imagination, that I had probably been staring at the mirror too long. But I knew what I had seen. She was real, and she was in the mirror. The next few days were the same. I would see the girl in the mirror standing behind me, just watching. I started to feel like she was following me, and I became afraid of the mirror. Every time I passed by it, I couldn't help but glance at the reflection, just to make sure she wasn't there. But she always was. Then one night, things took a darker turn. I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps in the hall outside my room. I was confused at first, thinking it was my parents or my brother, but when I listened closer, I realized the footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they didn't sound like anyone I knew. They were too soft, almost childlike. I could hear them getting closer, the sound of someone walking down the hallway toward my door. Suddenly, I remembered the girl in the mirror, and the fear hit me like a punch to the chest. I bolted, out of bed, grabbing the flashlight from my nightstand, and crept to the door, holding my breath. The footsteps were getting closer. I slowly cracked open the door, and my heart nearly stopped. In the hallway, standing in front of the mirror, was the girl. But this time, she wasn't just standing there. She was moving, pacing back and forth in front of the mirror, as if waiting for something, or someone. She didn't notice me watching. Her face was still hidden by her long hair, but her hands were pressed flat against the glass. Her fingers splayed out as if she was trying to reach something. I was frozen in fear, unable to move or speak. My body was paralyzed with terror as I watched her. Then, suddenly, she stopped. Her head snapped up, and she looked directly at me. Her eyes were hollow, empty. "Come closer," she whispered. The voice was soft, like a breeze, but it chilled me to the bone. I didn't want to go closer. I didn't even want to look at her anymore. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. But even with the door between us, I could hear the faint whispering. "Come closer," over and over again, like a broken record. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my bed, curled up under the covers, listening to the whispers and the faint scratching sound on the door. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination, or if something, someone, was really there. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I couldn't. I was too terrified to move. The next morning, I told my parents again. They were concerned, of course, but once again, they dismissed it. "You're just having bad dreams, sweetie," they said. "You know there's nothing to be afraid of." But I knew what I had seen, and after that night I refused to go near the mirror again. Things got worse after that. I started hearing whispers in the middle of the night, even when I was awake. They were faint at first, but they grew louder. I would hear the girl's voice, always calling me, telling me to come closer. I even started seeing her in other places, not just the mirror. I would turn around and see her standing in the corner of my room, or out of the corner of my eye as I passed by a window. She was always watching me. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear of seeing her, of hearing her, was too much. I begged my parents to let me sleep in their room, but they didn't understand. They told me I needed to be brave, that it was just my imagination. That's when I did something I regret. In my desperation to make her go away, I tried to destroy the mirror. One afternoon, when no one was home, I grabbed a hammer from the garage and went up to the hallway. The mirror was hanging there, just like it had always been, but now it felt like an enemy, like something that was actively trying to lure me in. I swung the hammer at the glass, and it shattered with a loud crash. But the instant the glass broke, I felt something change. The temperature in the room dropped, and the air grew thick. The whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. It was then that I realized something truly terrifying. I hadn't just shattered the mirror, I had trapped her. I could hear the faint sounds of scratching again, but it wasn't coming from the mirror. It was coming from inside the walls. "Let me out!" The voice was louder now, and more desperate. It came from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. I ran out of the house, screaming for my parents, but when they came back, the house was silent. The mirror had been destroyed, and so had the girl. But something was still wrong. The house felt different, heavier, colder. The whispers never stopped, and I knew that the girl was still there, trapped somewhere in the house, waiting for the next person to come along. We moved out of the house a few months later. My parents said it was just because of the bad memories, but I knew the truth. I could still hear her voice in my dreams sometimes, calling me back to the house. And sometimes when I look into a mirror, I can still feel her presence, just behind me. Conclusion: the girl in the mirror was never truly gone. She left behind an echo, a shadow of what she once was. The house is no longer there, but every time I walk past a mirror, I wonder, is she still out there, watching me, waiting for me to come back? The Eyes in the Attic. I was 6 years old when we moved into the house on Maple Street. It was a small 2-story house with an attic that I was immediately drawn to. The house itself was old, built sometime in the early 1900s, and had an unsettling but intriguing charm. The moment we walked through the front door, I was captivated by the creaky stairs, the dark wooden floors, and the smell of dust that seemed to cling to the air. There was something about the house that felt lived in, like it had a history of its own. My parents were thrilled with the house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I remember my father warning me not to play in the attic. "It's just full of old things and dust," he'd say. "Stay out of there, all right?" But I was a curious child, and no matter how many times my parents told me to avoid it, the attic called to me. The first time I ventured up there, it was during a quiet afternoon while my parents were busy in the living room. I had already explored every corner of the house, and the attic seemed like the last unexplored territory. So I climbed the stairs, heart racing, and pushed open the creaky door to the attic. Inside, it was dark, with only a faint beam of sunlight sneaking through a cracked window. The air smelled musty, like old cardboard and forgotten memories. There were boxes stacked high, old furniture covered in white sheets, and piles of books scattered around. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, filled with remnants of the past. But it was the eyes that I couldn't forget. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But then, in the corner of the attic, I saw them. 2 small, dark eyes peering at me from under an old blanket. They were unmistakable. For a moment I was frozen, staring at the eyes that seemed to stare right through me. The eyes didn't blink or move, but I could feel them watching me, and it made my skin crawl. I remember feeling a surge of panic. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. When I turned to run back downstairs, I heard a soft, unsettling whisper coming from behind me. "Stay with me." The voice was low, almost like a raspy breath, but it was unmistakably real. I spun around, but the eyes were gone. The blanket was undisturbed, the attic silent once again. I ran downstairs, trembling, and tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. But after that day, the presence in the attic started to feel more real. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. Every time I passed by the attic door, I felt a pull, like something was calling me to go back up there. But I was too scared. One night after my parents had gone to bed, I woke up to the sound of creaking footsteps above me. I knew I had to be imagining it, but the sound was so real, so loud, that it couldn't have been. My heart raced as I listened. The footsteps sounded like they were pacing back and forth across the floor of the attic. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I had heard those footsteps before. Terrified, I crept into my parents' room, but they were fast asleep. I stared at the ceiling, hoping the noises would stop, but instead, they grew louder. I could hear someone, or something, moving in the attic. The creaking of the floorboards, the dragging of something heavy across the wood. Then, the voice came again. "Come up here, I'm waiting." I froze in place, my body paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream for my parents, but no sound came out. The voice sounded so close, so near, as though it was right next to me, whispering in my ear. Eventually, the noises stopped, and everything fell silent. I lay in bed, wide-eyed and terrified, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning came, I told my parents what had happened, but of course they dismissed it as a bad dream. "The house is just old, sweetie," my mom said, ruffling my hair. "There's nothing to be afraid of." But I knew what I had heard, and the fear didn't go away. The next day, I decided I needed to go into the attic again. I had to know what was going on. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I convinced my older brother, Sean, to come with me, and together we crept up the stairs into the attic. The moment we opened the door, a blast of cold air hit us. The room was still, the boxes undisturbed, but something felt different this time. As we stepped into the attic, I saw it. The blanket that had once covered the eyes was now lying on the floor, crumpled in the corner. I felt my heart race again, but Sean was already walking ahead, poking through the boxes. Then we heard it. A faint tapping sound, like something small and sharp knocking against the floor. I turned around to see the outline of a figure in the far corner, standing completely still. I didn't even have to look closely to see it was a person, a child, no older than me, standing completely still in the dark corner. The figure wore tattered clothes, and its face was hidden beneath long matted hair. But I could see the eyes, dark, empty, and hollow, staring at me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The child didn't respond. Instead, it took a slow step toward me, and the tapping sound grew louder with every movement. I backed away, gripping Sean's arm, but he didn't seem to notice. He was too busy digging through the boxes, unaware of what was happening around him. The figure's eyes followed me as I backed toward the door, and just before I turned to run, it whispered, "Stay with me, forever." I bolted out of the attic, dragging Sean behind me. We ran down the stairs and into the living room where our parents were sitting. Sean, still oblivious to what had just happened, laughed and asked if I was scared of spiders or something. I told them nothing. I didn't know how to explain it, and part of me didn't want to. I just wanted to forget about it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I heard the whispers again, faint at first, but growing louder. "Come up here. I'm waiting for you." The sound of footsteps followed, but this time I couldn't ignore it. I had to face it. I stood up quietly and walked toward the attic door, but when I opened it, I saw nothing. The attic was empty. The air was still, and there were no eyes. I never heard the whispers again. The footsteps never returned, but I could still feel the presence. Even now, all these years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, hearing faint whispers in the corners of my room. I don't think it's gone. I think it's still waiting for me. Conclusion: that house on Maple Street was never really empty. The child in the attic never left. And sometimes when I pass by an old house with an attic, I can't help but wonder if the eyes are still watching me, waiting for me to come back. The shadows in the walls. I was 7 years old when my family moved into a house on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't a big house, but it had an eerie charm to it. The kind of house that felt like it had seen better days, but still held on to the memories of its past. It was surrounded by a dense forest, with trees that seemed to watch the house, their branches swaying even when there was no wind. My parents loved the house. It had a big backyard, and it was quiet, far from the noise of the city. But the moment we moved in, I could feel it. Something wasn't right. It wasn't a feeling I could explain, but I knew it deep inside. My parents thought I was just nervous about the new house, so they reassured me everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something in the house, something watching. The first strange thing happened on the very first night. My parents put me in a room at the end of the hall, a room with a large old wardrobe and a small window overlooking the yard. I didn't like that room at all. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, and the air always felt thick, like something was just beyond my vision. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. The house was silent, but I could hear faint sounds coming from the walls, scratching noises, like something was moving inside the walls, just out of sight. I tried to ignore it, but the scratching grew louder, and then I heard something else, a whisper. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. It was a voice, but not a voice I recognized. "Help me!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned around in bed, looking toward the walls, but there was nothing there. No one was there. The house felt as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if something was just beyond the walls, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The next day, I tried to forget about the whispers. My parents were busy unpacking, and I spent the day playing outside. But when the sun set and the house grew quiet again, the unease returned. That night as I lay in bed, I heard the whispers again. But this time, they were louder, more urgent. "Help me, please, come closer." The voice was begging now, almost frantic. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room, tears streaming down my face. "Mom! Dad! There's someone in the walls!" My parents, still half asleep, reassured me that it was just the house settling, that it was nothing to worry about. They told me to go back to bed, but I couldn't. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. The following days were worse. The whispers didn't stop. They came every night, growing louder, more frantic. Sometimes I could hear scratching sounds in the walls, as if something was trying to escape. Other times, it was like a low growl, something dark and malevolent lurking in the spaces between the walls. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. My parents still didn't believe me. They told me I was being dramatic and that I needed to stop making things up. But one night, my mom heard it too. She was sitting with me in my room trying to comfort me when it happened. The scratching started again, followed by the whispers. "Help me. I can't breathe. Help me." My mom looked at me, her face pale. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, terrified. The sound was unmistakable. It was coming from the walls. My mom stood up quickly, her face tight with worry. "We need to get out of here." I followed her down the stairs and into the living room where my dad was. She told him what we had heard, and his face turned ashen. He had been skeptical at first, but when he heard the voice himself, he didn't know what to think. That night, we didn't sleep. We stayed up, listening to the sounds that seemed to come from everywhere. The whispers, the scratching, the low growls. It was like the house was alive, like something was crawling inside the walls, trying to break free. The next day, We called a contractor to come and check the house. He came by and inspected the walls but found nothing. No pipes, no rodents, no explanation for the noises we had been hearing. But when he went into the attic to check the top of the house, he found something. He came back down looking pale, his face grim. "There's something up there," he said. "Something that shouldn't be. You need to leave." We didn't question him. We packed our things and left that very day, not knowing what exactly was in the house, but knowing that whatever it was, it didn't want us there. Years later, I learned the truth. The house had once belonged to a family who had mysteriously disappeared. The police never figured out what happened to them, but there were rumors that something terrible had happened in that house. Some said the family had died in the walls, trapped inside after a terrible accident, their spirits forever imprisoned by the structure of the house. Others said the house was built on land that had been cursed long before, and that the spirits of the forgotten lingered within its walls. I still don't know what happened in that house, but the whispers never stopped, and the scratching never ceased. Whatever was trapped in those walls was still there, waiting. Conclusion. The house on Maple Street was never just a house. It was a prison, a place where something evil had taken root, and it would never let go. Even now, years later, I can still hear the whispers in the dark corners of my mind, reminding me of what lurked inside the walls. The Crying Child. I was 8 years old when my family moved into an old house in a small town. It wasn't the house we'd originally planned on buying, but when we saw it, my parents were immediately drawn to it. It was large, with 3 stories, a wide porch, and an expansive backyard that seemed perfect for my sister and me to run around in. The only thing that bothered me was the fact that the house had been vacant for nearly a decade, and no one in town seemed to talk about it much. The first few weeks were peaceful. We unpacked, explored the house, and settled in. But I began to notice things. Little things at first. A door that wouldn't stay closed, lights flickering for no reason, and strange noises at night. I remember lying in bed one night, staring up at the ceiling when I first heard it. A faint, distant cry. It wasn't the kind of cry you hear from a baby. This cry sounded like someone was calling out in pain, like a child, but much older. I sat up in bed, confused and frightened. It was coming from somewhere in the house, but I couldn't tell where. I chalked it up to my imagination and tried to ignore it. The next night, I heard it again, louder this time, and this time it sounded closer. "Mom!" I called out, but my mom and dad were already asleep. I didn't want to disturb them, so I decided to get up and look for the source of the crying. As I tiptoed down the hall, I could hear it more clearly, coming from the attic. The attic had always been off-limits to my sister and me. My parents told us it was filled with junk, and we were never allowed to go up there. I hadn't given it much thought until that night. The crying seemed to be coming from there, faint, desperate. I couldn't help myself. I climbed the creaky stairs to the attic and opened the door, the hinges groaning loudly in protest. The room was dark, dusty, and filled with old furniture covered in sheets. There was nothing in the attic that could explain the sound. I stood there for a moment, listening carefully, but the crying had stopped. I turned to leave, but as I was about to close the door, I heard it again. A soft, heart-wrenching cry, but now it was unmistakably from within the room. "Help me!" The voice was weak and distant, like a child lost and calling out for someone. Frozen with fear, I turned back around. There was no one in the attic, but the cry continued, echoing in the walls. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest. The attic seemed much colder now, and the air felt heavy. I ran down the stairs and back to my room, shutting the door behind me. The crying didn't stop. It seemed to follow me, getting louder, as if something, or someone, was getting closer. I buried my head under the covers and tried to block out the sound. The next morning, I told my parents what I had heard. My mom wasn't worried. She told me it was probably just the house settling and the wind making strange noises. But I knew what I had heard. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the wind. It was something else. For the next few days, the crying continued every night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the house with us. I started avoiding the attic completely, but the cries still found their way into my room. Sometimes I'd hear them from the hallway, or sometimes even from my parents' room. No matter where I went, the sound would follow me. I started to lose sleep, barely getting any rest. I was scared to be alone in the house, and even during the day, I felt like I was being watched. Then one afternoon, as I sat in the living room reading a book, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking around the room. I turned around to find no one there. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I looked up at the old mirror on the wall. There, behind me, reflected in the glass, was a shadow. It was dark, vague, but unmistakable. A small figure, maybe a child, standing behind me, staring at me with eyes that I could not see clearly. The figure was hunched over, as if it was crouching or hiding. I screamed, but when I turned around, there was nothing. Nothing but the empty room. I was terrified. I ran to find my parents, but when I told them what had happened, they seemed too tired to take me seriously. They told me it was just the old house playing tricks on me. They said I needed to stop letting my imagination run wild. But I knew. I knew the house was haunted. One night the crying came again, louder than ever. It wasn't just a cry. It was a wail, a desperate, piercing scream that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my sister, Emily, and ran to my parents' room. They were asleep, but I shook them awake, begging them to do something. My mom finally agreed to go upstairs with me. We climbed the stairs to the attic together, and I could hear the crying growing louder, more frantic, as if it were right behind the door. My mom opened the door cautiously, and the attic was eerily quiet. But then, she froze. I watched her face drain of color. There, in the corner of the attic, was a small wooden rocking chair, and sitting in it was a figure. A child, hunched over, rocking back and forth. I couldn't make out its face, but I could see its thin arms, covered in what appeared to be dark marks. Its back was bent unnaturally, and the chair creaked as it moved. My mom reached out slowly, but before she could touch the figure, it turned its head toward us. Its eyes were hollow, black, endless pits, and its mouth twisted into a horrifying smile. The figure let out a high-pitched laugh, the sound chilling to the bone. "Help me!" The voice came again, but this time it was much louder, much clearer. And this time it wasn't just coming from the figure. It was coming from the walls, from everywhere. I screamed and ran, pulling my sister with me. We rushed out of the old house and into the yard, but the crying didn't stop. Even outside, I could hear it, echoing in the wind. We never went back inside that night. My parents called the local authorities, but when they came to investigate, they found nothing. No figures, no sounds, no traces of any kind. It was as if the house had swallowed whatever had been there. We moved out of the house a few weeks later, unable to shake the terrifying experience. And even now I can still hear the faint crying sometimes, especially when I'm alone. I hear it in my dreams, or when I'm walking through a quiet room. And sometimes, when I look in a dark corner, I wonder if it's waiting for me to come back. Conclusion. The crying child never left the house. We may have moved away, but the memory of it still haunts me. The sound of that desperate wail, the small figure in the rocking chair, and the hollow, empty eyes will stay with me forever.